I'm going to kick us off. And first of all, thank you so much for joining, Diego, Ian, Tariq. Super, super grateful that you responded and helped us out. I can share a little bit about the Xoogler community, and then Chris Fong, who's one of the founders of the Xoogler community, he wasn't able to join. He's based out of Singapore, so super late his time right now. But the context was that when the executive order came out, and then also with the several events with multiple other organizations in terms of board governance and AI safety governance that has been in the news around for more so in the last few months. Chris and I were having a conversation about it, and we thought it would be very helpful to the community, Xoogler community, to have a panel of experts to really talk about it and break it down more in terms of practically what are the implications from for startup founders, for investors, and also just for a lot of students, ex-Googlers who are interested in learning more about the space. So Xooglers are basically all ex-Googlers globally. It's a 30,000 size community all over the world, super connected. We host events all the time, almost every month. I don't know, there are multiple events happening simultaneously in all parts of the world, and it's a completely community-led. So it's has lesser organizational affiliation for each of us, but more sort of the implication of giving back to the organization from where most of us started our careers. And so I'll do a quick intro for myself, and then a few admin items, and then I would go on to introduce all our panelists. So thank you so much for joining. I'm Medha. I lead a lot of AI strategy, AI governance work at McKinsey. Prior to McKinsey, I had spent about 5 years as an edtech co-founder in India, and worked a lot with public sector entities as well. And anything which is at the intersection of AI and societal impact is of core interest to me. I have had the opportunity to actually cross paths with multiple people in the AI governance space, more so in the Bay Area, and have been, it's been very intellectually exciting conversations. So some of the people I've spoken with are on this call as well right now. And just in terms of admin, as I already mentioned, the call is being recorded. So hope everyone is okay with it. In terms of distribution, we do share it on YouTube on our Xoogler channel. So if anyone has any apprehensions about sharing it, please do contact me separately after that, and we can choose to not share it if that's the case. I also want to highlight that everyone's views on this topic are personal, and I do want to recognize all of us represent, different organizations. So I do want to highlight that it's a topic with no clear black and white. So I do want to highlight that everyone's views are personal and respected in this context. And lastly, I want to give a big shout out to Nitwin, who's on this call, who's really helped rally all the people, create all the marketing materials, everything as a side hustle. So thank you so much, Nitwin, and also thank you so much for setting up this call. And with that, I will pass it on to the panelists. Maybe I'll do a quick intro based on what has been shared with me, but please do give more color to your background as well. Diego Oppenheimer, thanks so much for joining. He's a serial entrepreneur, product developer, and investor with an extensive background in all things data. He's currently a managing partner at Factory, a venture fund that specializes in AI investments. He is also co-founder of Guardrails AI. Previously, he was an executive vice president at Data Robot, founder and CEO at Algorithmia, which was acquired by Data Robot, and shipped some of Microsoft's most used data analysis products, including Excel, Power BI, SQL Server, etc. Diego is active in AI ML communities as a founding member and strategic advisor for AI Infrastructure Alliance, as well as the MLOps community, and works with leaders to define AI industry standards and best practices. Diego holds a bachelor's degree in information systems and a master's degree in business intelligence and data analytics from Carnegie Mellon University. Thank you so much for joining. Tariq is a principal at Omidyar Network India, an impact fund that invests in bold entrepreneurs who help create a meaningful life for every Indian, especially focused on the next 500 million people. He leads the Digital Society Initiative, where he invests in early stage startups and nonprofit initiatives that enable the adoption of responsible technology practices. And Ian Eisenberg, he is the head of AI governance research at Credo AI, which is an AI governance company. And he also leads a very vibrant community within the Bay Area called AI Salon, which is focused on AI and societal impact topics, and also AI governance and safety topics. Thank you so much for joining. If I missed out on any specific details that anyone would like to highlight, please do that as well, and then I can start out. All good? Okay, great. So maybe I can, give a little bit of context on like why we're talking about this in the first place, right? Like, so the conversation around risks associated with AI development and deployment have been long around. It's been much more recently kind of the nature of the risks and the understanding of them amongst people has been much more aggravated recently with generative AI being accessible to common people. And we've started understanding these risks more so how they shape individuals who are impacted and not so much by individuals who are building AI. And that has made the conversation interesting in that people have participated more on understanding what are the implications of bias, hallucinations, accuracy, or even really understanding how these technologies work. More so recently, the topic has been in the limelight with the UK AI Safety Summit, the executive order which came out in November, and then also just how governments all over the world are shaping policies around it. And this goes beyond just the US and UK as well. There's of course Singapore. There are also a lot of developing countries, India, Nigeria, that are all sort of shaping how do we tackle implications of AI innovation and adoption. And so what we really wanted to do is break it down a little bit, because there are so many topics and this conversation can go everywhere, and then make it a little bit more practical in terms of what does it mean to operationalize responsible AI practices. And so with that, maybe I can start out, right, with just the topic of what is an AI risk. There is a spectrum of AI risks that, are being spoken about, some which are associated with models, accuracy, performance, privacy. There is a conversation around what would happen when these systems across the AI system, right? Like we talk about what job loss or global AI divide from the perspective of global North versus South. And then there is this narrative around, on the other end, about existential risk, and people lie at different levels of the spectrum of what risk they want to talk about and focus on. So maybe I can start out with, Diego, with you in understanding, how should organizations, and by organizations, we can break it down by large organizations or startups if you choose to, really make sense of these, and which of these risks are more imperative to be addressed versus not, according to you?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. So I think we to start to kind of answer that question is kind of worth taking a step back, because the area of AI responsible or kind of like risk has actually it's evolving quite rapidly. And it's particularly with the kind of introduction of foundational models into into the nature, because traditionally, and so this is something that I spent multiple years working on previous, a lot of the kind of quote unquote responsible AI was very much focused on individual model, and a lot in finance, for example. I'm a little bit biased. I spent a ton of time in the financial world looking at things like model risk management, working with regulators on how machine learning was going to be adopted into the general kind of context of financial services and how it's going to use, how do you regulate it? How do you actually document things? And it's actually a fairly, I don't want to simplify it, but it was like a fairly straightforward, like, like thing to do. You looked at specific models and the methodologies that they were used, what they were being used for. You tried to understand their failure modes. You tried to document those failure modes, make sure that you kind of complied with like general, regulations. And, a big part of it, and again, this is a complete oversimplification, so please don't think it's that easy, because it takes quite a bit of work, but it's essentially, does the model say do what it's going to do? Where did you use that data? Did you balance things? And you're really looking out for in particularly thorny areas, like what's called credit and loan stuff. Like, am I not, kind of singling out specific, populations that I shouldn't be? Am I not using factors that are illegal to use? Right. These models have no conscience, right? So like, you give them data, they're making, kind of like statistical analysis of that data. And so, if you, the most famous ones being like, if you used credit models to accept credit, and you just kind of like raw, use raw data, you probably wouldn't accept a loan in any single impoverished neighborhood. And, I live in the US, so any zip code in the US, right? And that's like highly illegal, right? Because it's essentially kind of like a direct discrimination to, if you double click on that. So that's kind of like where, I think where things started, right? Which is, hey, when you're using mass data at this point, like it is actually very easy to single out populations, and there's laws that make that illegal, as well as kind of like what we need to follow. So a lot of the risks were around that. In other cases, the risks were around kind of like potentially brand risk, like if you, put together a, operational risk was another one that I kind of always talked about. Like, you put a recommender on the front page of your website, like that starts failing, from an AI perspective, like you're going to lose money, or potentially like, it can go in either direction that you were not expected. With the introduction of foundational models, and for anybody who's not on the audience super aware what those mean, it's kind of like the superset of things like ChatGPT. ChatGPT uses a bunch of large language models under the scene, that went from single task completers to multitask completers, right? Like they can do a lot of different kinds of things. And if you think about when you're calculating kind of the risk surface of what these things can do, like there's a lot more failure modes. They can do a lot more things. They're amazing. Like I'm like, maximalist AI, kind of like want everything to go out there, but like, you've opened up a surface area to do a lot of things, everything from, doing the traditional things that models could do wrong, which is, singling out populations, potentially not, behaving in the right place, but also doing a bunch of things that were not expected. We see the famous ones, like, which are the ones that like are easy to get headlines. Oh, the chatbot went racist, or the chatbot like said a bunch of stupid stuff. But like in general, and I'm again oversimplifying this, like we have something that can do, anything, and you have wanted to do a specific task. So now there's a bunch of risk in it doing things outside of that anything that you might want to do. Something as simple as, I have a chatbot on my company website and I don't want it to mention a competitor. Right? Like that's a risk. It's a brand risk for me. It's a brand risk in how to do it. Like, how do I stop that? How do I calculate that? And then we go kind of like the next step, which is, I believe, like the more philosophical one, which we also have to pay attention to. This is probably the greatest technology. I believe it's the greatest technology I will see in my lifetime. It's one of these kind of like, mass step functions in terms of, if you think about kind of like our industrial revolution to a certain degree. And if you're a studier of history, every single time there's been a moment like that, there's been a mass moment of creative destruction. Like I'd say it's clear that there's going to be job changes, there's going to be job losses, there's going to be job creation, but like we will go through a period of creative destruction. And so how do we do that in a kind of like responsible way? How do we do that in kind of like the benefit of humanity? Like that's a whole other set of risks that kind of I would kind of do it. So you can take it down from like these like very basic, like, please don't make me lose money, right? Like, which is, kind of like a lot of the stuff that we worked on in the financial services for many, many years. We've been using machine learning models in financial services for almost 15 years. And all the way to kind of like, okay, what are the kind of like big impact ticket items that we need to take care of as a as a society. And so that's kind of the gamut of kind of like the risks that I see that can and should be should be addressed and can be addressed, like in my opinion, like already. Like this is not like we're not in science fiction world when it comes to trying to put boundaries and guardrails around how these systems work.
Fantastic. And we will go back to the creative destruction point that you spoke about a little later as well, but that was super comprehensive. I guess I'll pass on the same question to Ian, you as well, but also would love to understand if, across the spectrum, one, if you agree with Diego, but also if across the spectrum of risk, is there a place where you think, we need to start ASAP versus others which seem like we can pause, they're not the most urgent problems?
Sure. Let me try and bring, I guess, the practical perspective. So Credo AI is an AI governance platform. And one of the reasons why I got into this area of AI governance in comparison to like creating policies or establishing guidelines or standards is I'm a big believer in tooling to support the easy adoption, like make the right path the easy path. And the reality, I think, is that responsible AI for most organizations, certainly small startups, but enterprises as well, is not a top-line priority. As you have brought up, Medad, this year, it has become much more of a priority. AI governance, AI risk is part of the lexicon, and that both will eventually become kind of enterprise priorities because of regulation that kind of forces that to be a priority, but also because it is a more pertinent aspect of brand risk, or their customers are asking for it. There are a lot of different kind of functions or dynamics that are taking place that are making kind of responsible AI practices and the risks associated with them more of a focus. And sometimes at larger organizations, you'll have some area of the company, a governance function, a responsible AI team that has this mandate, and they are gung-ho about trying to reduce the risks of AI systems while preserving the innovative potential of the company, because of course, many companies are worried about the risk of being left behind in the sea change with foundation models. But those governance teams don't necessarily have the tools they need to perform their function, and they sometimes don't have either the mandate from leadership or the just the culture hasn't shifted in a large enterprise to allow responsible AI to be performed well. And when you're a small organization, like a startup, you have to be like, brutally prioritized in your kind of time spent. And so if responsible AI practices, which I'm going to define broadly to be kind of focusing on the risks of AI systems, so that you can like properly make benefit risk trade-offs. It's going to be organizations where the kind of risks that are traditionally under responsible AI, kind of fairness, explainability, these kinds of things, where they will invest more, or they're in a highly regulated industry. So Diego brought up kind of model risk management, which is a whole organizational, there are many companies that's what they provide because they've been incentivized to provide that by at least one law that I know about, SR 11-7 in the financial space, which has both acculturated financial organizations to doing this. They have risk management teams, they have these tooling, et cetera, but there are relatively well-defined steps. Most of responsible AI isn't that well-defined yet. And so we have standards that are starting to arise. So let me just say what I think enterprises should do right now. And this is actually my understanding of how a lot of standard creators think about their standards today. So I'll just bring up one, NIST, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. They're responsible for, in a lot of ways, pushing forward. I mean, they've been doing this for a while now, but pushing forward some of the aspects of Biden's executive order. And they have stood up an AI consortium right now to kind of forward AI safety best practices. And you could think about a standard as something that you have to follow. You're either following it or you're not. And people will ask, are you following the NIST AI standard? Should I follow the NIST AI? That's one way of thinking about a standard. Another way is it is a collated guide. They are collated guidelines. They're guidance about what processes you should be instantiating in your organization. And if you're at zero, you can take some of those processes and move forward without, being weighed down by needing to do everything all at once. And so I'll just say for a lot of organizations, the bar is quite low, and starting at a place where you basically register your AI systems, like you understand, I'm using the word system because again, I agree with Diego that there are some risks of models, but like kind of the systems that are potentially built on a foundation model within the context of a particular use case are important, but you need to like collate all of those systems in one place such that you can start to understand, hey, these are kind of low risk systems. I don't have to put very heavy governance on them, but these systems over here, these are particularly damaging either to, I think, to my company. They're Netflix's recommendation top of page, recommender. They have incredible financial implication, or they are explicitly regulated. If we use the EU AI Act, they're like have the remote biometrics, or they have some consequence for fundamental human flourishing, like healthcare. Or as an organization, you just have some policy or some ethical stance that makes a certain kind of use case high risk. Either way, you need to understand all of the AI systems, which is difficult because they're proliferating and everyone can kind of build them out. And you want to make sure that your, for now, limited governance resources are best deployed to de-risk and kind of provide oversight on the highest risk system. So it's kind of a triaging path where you can like understand, okay, this attrition model that I've developed to try to manage my own employees, is important to me, but it's not external facing. It's not, there are reasons why that would be risky and the reasons why it's not. So maybe that's we can get into more about those first steps, but I think a lot of organizations are just like right now needing to define that early infrastructure that eventually turns into culture and the kind of outputs that we care about, all of the kind of risk mitigations that Diego brought up.
Yeah, and that really resonates even in my conversations with organizations as well. I think one of the things, Ian, though, is the question about what is the framework for risk triaging, right? Like you can think about, okay, data types, or, especially if you're just for the first time piloting some sort of a generative AI solution, or you've trying out some off-the-shelf solution for your organization, you might want to start out with, not using sensitive data, not using customer data, etc. And those are the right things. And most people know, most organizations realize that. But, beyond what is like obvious, what are either frameworks, solutions to actually help organizations think through that triaging?
Well, one thing I'll say is even when things are obvious, like let's say some organizations that are a little bit more mature on how they manage their AI systems might have had something like I am a healthcare company. My models need to access HIPAA compliant data at some point. So they probably have data governance in place, and there's probably an intake flow where they are asked, what kind of data are you going to need for this model? Oh, you're going to need HIPAA data. Well, then before we release it to you, you need to go through, X and Y steps. So that's simple to say, right? Okay, that kind of data set needs to get this process out, but it's actually not, it's not incredibly difficult, but it's not trivial to implement, to have that implemented at scale such that you can be confident that whatever process, even a simple flowchart process, is being applied consistently within your organization. So that's one. So I just wanted to say that even on the easiest types, making sure that everyone is on board and that you're not slowing down. Like the other side is you don't really want your data scientists to be like waiting forever to get their confirmation that this is okay to move forward with, or that, there are all these like blockers. So you want to make that process, work effectively and quickly. Okay. So that's saying that's even difficult when it's trivial. But more recent aspects are being stood up kind of all the time. So OMB, I think that's the Organization of Management and Budget. That's part of the White House. They have a kind of guidelines on again, kind of governance, which speaks about, human rights impacting. So that has its own set of bullets. These are a little more difficult to interpret. Is this system I'm building human rights impacting? The EU AI Act has a risk-based framework, which may be a little more straightforward, but still needs adjudication that will ultimately probably be done by lawyers and jurisprudence, in the future. Right now, again, how do you implement that? Well, you need some, it's pointing out that most AI systems are in some ways multi-stakeholder, and you'll probably need some expertise that is traditionally outside of machine learning teams' kind of purview to be able to allow you to make those decisions. And so different organizations are helping this in different ways. Credo AI, as part of our flow, we try to support those early stages of triaging. Other organizations just have like multi-stakeholders kind of come together. And I'm sure there are some that are almost like, ML ops or LLM ops, and their perspective might be, actually, you don't have to make this choice at all. Monitor all your AI systems at scale. It'll be really easy. Just put this one line of code. So the easier we can make the kind of mitigations at the end, like monitoring, just as one example, or guardrails, the less triaging we need to do, because we just apply good practices on everything. So triaging is a function of scarcity. Maybe that, I'll stop there, and I see other people kind of wanting to jump in.
Yeah, no, that really resonates. And I think, just also the fact of, you mentioned OMB and you mentioned guidelines, NIST, et cetera, as well. I think one of the things that I've heard from organizations is also this role of having a translator across different stakeholders, right? Like, so being able to understand, not every organization, individual, or data scientist, designer, data engineer will have the time or the capacity to read the executive order, right? Like, is there a way to kind of translate that to what does it mean for my role and my job as well? Tariq, I'll pass it on to you to really understand, I guess, two things, right? Like, one is you're focused on investing in responsible AI and responsible tech, and you have this lens of Global South, investing in South Asia. I want to understand one, I guess, one, if you agree with what is being discussed so far, and then second, just what are the kind of solutions, like practical solutions, that your organization has been investing in the space in?
Sure. So I think I'll just try and zoom out a bit and try and move away and unpack what risk might mean in the Indian context, and at least what I'm hearing around from folks around me, right? I think though, and this I'm trying to borrow from a leading technology policy lawyer that we have here in India, and he said, look, the global north seems to be sort of concerned with the risks and all the terrible things that can happen with AI, and the global south looks at it and says, we've got 1,000 problems. Can AI be that thing that can accelerate an opportunity to solve them, right? And therefore, the thrust when it comes to regulation or policy is always around, hey, it's less to prevent harm and more sort of policies and infrastructure to enable innovation, right? And sort of quoting the Minister of State here, right, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, he said at the AI Safety Summit, right, AI remains for India a very good opportunity. It should not be demonized and regulated out of existence. So that's almost the macro perspective there, right? So yeah, it's about, look, can organizations like Vadhwani AI really help scale diagnostics? Can organizations like OpenAI help solve law and justice problems? And so the conversation is really not about enterprise solutions at all, right? Like so the conversation around me is all about, there are clear state capacity gaps when it comes to many of the specific themes, and therefore what can one do? And what the room really came down to is, like, the real risk for India may be that we don't use this well enough to solve many of the problems. Like it's slightly outside the spectrum of what we think of AI governance and risk, but that's something I just wanted to sort of place on the table. And but that said, look, I mean, of course, the model specific risks both Diego and Ian sort of spoken about. But I think India, there are a couple of things I would personally worry about. One is the labor market sort of implications of it, right? Like India is largely, I mean, India's economic growth story is largely driven by its IT exports and its knowledge economy, right? And we've got the CTO of India's largest brokerage company coming and saying, look, hey, I could lay off 20% of my workforce, or 10 or 15, I don't know what the exact numbers. So we really don't know what to do about it. It will probably happen if there is value, but that's one thing for us to consider about. And the second one, and is really state adoption of AI, right? And it's, when we think of the private market, look, if your AI model continues to have risks, bias, issues, one would imagine and one would hope that there is some level of private market correction, like consumers will probably go to a different sort of a different provider, and there is some pressure to get better at how you manage your data and how you manage your models. When it comes to state adoption of AI, once you adopt a model, it tends to stick there, right? Like it's not like you have too many alternatives to go after. So before you sort of integrate AI models at scale to across these many sensitive, critical, important sectors, like it's important to think of what are the mechanisms and the capacities that the state needs to take on. And I think that's a whole different ballgame altogether. Like, who can the state hire? How open are they to sort of killing ideas which are not working? So I think those are the two sort of macro risks. But I'll stop there, and if you want me to just touch upon a couple of the things that we are working on, happy to. But
I actually have a question. So
sure.
I wonder sometimes, I sometimes think about an analogy between the current moment in AI governance and cybersecurity practices, where it took a while to kind of bring in both the understanding of attacks, which are constantly evolving, the defense, and also the tooling and culture that made it just kind of a part of how organizations build a bunch of their software. And it's difficult kind of after the fact to bring this process in. But I wonder if India has the possibility to kind of leapfrog in some ways some organizations that have been, building machine learning for a long time, and now can, both because it's potentially easier to build ML empowered tools with foundation models, much easier than a previous generation of ML systems, and also are maybe standing up these applications, these companies for the first time, that it will be easier and therefore like less of a governance, like less of an innovation risk to kind of bring in some aspects of governance along the way, such that in 10 years you have no kind of public backlash. The AI technology continues to advance, and India bears those innovative fruits not over the first 3 months or 6 months, but over like decades. Does that resonate in any way?
Yeah, I think definitely on the private sector side for sure, right? If there are opportunities to just adopt all the tech that's out there, I think they will. It's more on the public sector side, is like, what is the capacity to even understand what the potential risks are, right? How do you even go about thinking, oh, there's this chatbot that could give me help my on-ground field worker with diagnostics of something. So how do you even think about what are the possibilities? I think once they figure out the scope of things that they are dealing with, I think they can go out and pick out the tooling and figure it out. It's almost at that strategic level of thinking of what should I really spend my time worrying about and thinking about. I think that's where a lot of the work, especially on the nonprofit side, needs to be done.
Yeah, and I also feel like there is this moment, into your point of like, and people, again, I think it's a spectrum in terms of what people think is like, will AI make the world more unequal versus more equal? Like, it's a big question mark. But I think, you know, if traditionally there are only certain kind of organizations with, you know, specific amount of resources who could hire technical talent, AI, ML talent to build solutions and reap benefits out of it, which is more, I'm mostly talking about economic benefits out of those technologies. That in some way that bar is kind of lowered. And in some ways that has also, that also means that there is an equalizing effect across different geographies. But the big question there is, do these countries, geographies, and in India, of course, massive country, like not everyone has access to the internet or the kind of internet we're talking about, also baseline infrastructure issues. But I think the biggest question is, when we're talking about AI risks, are we also making sure that the enablers of those AI in terms of actually having, like I said, internet is one aspect of it, but actually having, you know, data parity, actually having those kind of baseline talent development, like are those things in place in these geographies to be able to reap benefits, or will they ultimately just be adopters of AI technology that is being built in different parts of the world? And that for me is like a bigger question, but that goes into like more less practical aspects right now, but more like a you know, a question around the global adoption or global equity aspect of it. I did want to you know, kind of go back to the question that I had asked Tariq. You are there, you mentioned a few organizations that are already building solutions, and maybe what I wanted to ask actually everyone on this group, and maybe we can start out with Diego, is what, when you speak with, you know, your customers, and I guess Tariq, in your sense it would be organized companies that you're investing in, but for Diego, again, it would be more customers or businesses, enterprises. What are the biggest AI risk questions that they have in mind today, and what are the gaps in terms of actually addressing? What is the white space here in this domain, in your opinion? And Diego, I'll start with you there.
Yeah, sure. So I think it very much depends on the type of organization in the industry, right? So, you know, and the use cases. So what Ian said about like these frameworks of attaching different that you really do need different standards for different use cases. I mean, like honestly, like the biggest risk behind AI is, from a company's perspective, is to blanket say AI is all the same, and I'm just going to create these like draconian like workflow processes that is going to make sure that I'll never use this technology and I'll become a laggard. Like very easy. That is the biggest risk, right? Because like if you do that, like you're pretty much guaranteed to get nothing out the door. You know, and there's no, I keep on going back to financial services, which is really my area of expertise, but like there's no better example of that, because what was traditionally the model risk management process and what you needed to do to get a model through that process is not possible, A, with deep learning models, and definitely not with when you're kind of like using a third-party built model, right? Where you don't have a kind of like provenance of the data and the methodologies and kind of like what they use. These are just not knowns. So I'd say like the biggest risk is of like not understanding that things are different, and that you're going to try to, you know, the biggest way to eliminate risk is to do nothing. Right? Like, I mean, if you don't do anything, there's no risk. I mean, existential risk maybe, right? And that is, and you know, and the entire financial services industry is, the whole thing is about controlling risk, right? For arbitrage opportunities, or trying to understand risk. So I think like when you look at the different organizations and how they're attacking it, they very much need to understand their workflows, their processes, what they're going to go use, and then how you associate like kind of like the boundaries of, you know, and probabilities of, you know, best case scenario and worst case scenario, and then be able to make a business decision associated with that. So I like the example that Ian said, like, look, if you have a model that you built internally and all it is doing a chatbot for, you know, your team to answer like basic HR questions, right, to the general populace of your organization, yeah, sure, like it can get it wrong, that could be a problem, but like ultimately, like, you know, the risk is ultimately, you know, pretty low. Now, that exact same chatbot you're putting it out in the wild, and you're a financial services organization, then suddenly, you know, somebody's saying, hey, what's my account balance? And they're like, it's blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, what stock should I buy? What stock should I buy is a disaster question to answer, right? Like there's like a dozen regulations with $1 million fines attached with every single instance of getting that wrong, right? Because you're not a broker, you don't have the right disclaimers, you're not supposed to blah, blah, blah. Like, and so like the whole like system here is really around like, you can do a lot of stuff with the AI, understanding the workflows, understanding the use cases that you're applying them to, and associating the kind of like AI framework and how tighten or not you're going to go do is like at the core, what these businesses are going to do. And it really goes by industry. Like, just my experience, and this is not a comment on any of the industries being like better or worse, right? Like, but like, healthcare, financial services, law, anything in government has an extra level of scrutiny, right? Like there's full frameworks around it. There's adoption frameworks. There's, a bunch of compliance things that are needed. If you're building a marketing analytics company, like you can pretty much do anything, with legal, right? And ethical. I'm just gonna like, I'm not suggesting anything weird here, but like, nobody's asking to see your model. Like, nobody's asking what you're doing with it. And it's not as problematic. So industry matters and the use cases matter, and people understanding that it's a sliding scale of risk, and being able to develop their frameworks either because they're using something like the NIST AI framework, or they're using a vendor or whoever that is to like help them understand like where their workflow falls because of XYZ. And then because of that, what kind of work they need to do is crucial for the adoption. It will accelerate the adoption of these technologies. Like this isn't like nobody's ever said that their compliance team is their favorite people, even though they're great humans. But being able to kind of like get in a close relationship and accelerate the delivery of workflows matters.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in here too about like, so the question is kind of what are the risks that organizations are worried about, and what are the current gaps in it, kind of addressing them. So the risks that enterprises are worried about are ultimately kind of business impact, financial risks, and the regulatory environment can potentially internalize some externalities that we want to, but even if a team is well intentioned or ethically minded, the organization is focused primarily on, like right now, private information leakage. That's a huge one. Unintentional IP usage, because that can lead to kind of legal risk. Robustness problems. That's the classic machine learning issue, right? I want to make sure my systems do whatever I design them to do well. And things like explainability are sometimes required by law, but the reason why organizations might want them is because they're ultimately interested in answering that robustness question. Like, is it going to work out of distribution? How is it working, etc. So there are like, these are the kinds of issues. Other things like fairness is both should be a concern for more organizations because it's ultimately a product concern. Is your product working well for different groups of people? But also is a PR concern, right? Like you don't want to find out that your organization is off. Now, what are organizations not worried about? In general, probably these like societal scale risks. Like, is my system going to contribute to misinformation that demolishes like democratic elections next? That is something that we need to somehow make organizations worried about, but that's not like a primary goal. So that separation is important. Now, what are the gaps? Well, one is we have these foundation models, and I think infrastructure is probably a good metaphor for what these what these foundation models ultimately will be. And there will probably be a lot of scrutiny on them moving forward because so many other organizations are building off of that. That marketing team or marketing company that Diego mentioned, they might not be under regulatory scrutiny, and they should be allowed to maybe use foundation models really easily. But the foundation model provider will potentially, either whether it's self-imposed or under regulatory scrutiny, be held to a very high standard to make sure that they are not allowing kind of risks to proliferate moving forward. So what are the gaps that we need to have that kind of value chain work well? Well, one, we need some level of transparency that allows the different organizations to be able to make informed decisions about the kind of the vendors they're going to use, or the machine, yeah, essentially like which products are they going to make use of, whether that's a user like the general public using an AI system, or one company purchasing another company's system. You can't be just using their kind of marketing material. We need an extra level of transparency that allows these decisions to be made well. And that can ultimately be forced. It doesn't need to be forced by regulation. It could be a point of soft law. Procurement departments might say, no, we need to see this, this, and this. And enterprises end up, creating some way of like how transparency works. Okay, so that's one aspect. But if you're transparent, what are you being transparent about? You probably how your system behaves in the wild in some way. So we need better and more comprehensive evaluations that both help, the organizations that use ML models recognize whether they're fit for their purpose, and also more general foundation models able to kind of communicate, we think we're good for these 100,000 different uses. I think in the past, we would calculate like precision or some ML metric for a particular use case. That's good. You're evaluating its fit for purpose. But when you're a foundation model, and when you have AI systems that can evaluate other AI systems, you are now in this potentially wonderful future where you can evaluate it on 100,000 dimensions. And how are you going to understand whether that 100,000 dimensions works for your company? You'll probably have your own AI system that interprets that. It's AI systems all the way down. We have a larger set of metrics. And the final gap, so gap one, just transparency, which needs to be incentivized from different ways. Gap two, which is kind of foundational, better evaluations, better tooling to make the evaluations that OpenAI and Anthropic are already doing more easy for other organizations to do. Like just evaluations as research to practice needs improvements. And the third is we talk about AI regulation, but there is currently very little. There's talk about the EU AI Act, whatever you think, there's talk about it, but it actually has not passed yet. The Biden executive order only applies to kind of federal agencies, and it's just an executive order. And so we're still at the cusp of regulation, and people will differ on what they want to happen next. I believe that we'll need some requirements, not just kind of voluntary commitments, to get us to this place where people are doing the kind of evaluations and are transparent and have the kind of impact assessments that we need to make this a kind of vibrant ecosystem, rather than a few people or a few organizations that are building up big AI systems. I'll stop there.
I love that, and that was just so comprehensive, and specifically the part around navigating the impact in society. And the other thing, while you were talking about, I got reminded of, was this whole aspect of the different versions of data nutrition labels, right? Like, what is the data good for versus not, and not having a kind of equivalent of the models as well. Although there are emerging benchmarks, and yesterday we had an announcement on by Meta as well on open source cybersecurity benchmarks. So I think there are kind of solutions emerging in that space. I know we have only 7 minutes, so I actually wanted to pivot to a bunch of questions which were DM'd to me, and then there are a few more that are in the chat. Let me pass it on to Randeep. Randeep, you sent me a few questions, so I'll maybe, because we have 7 minutes, pick your top one, and then I'll pass it on to Will, who also had a question. Do you want to voice it over, Randeep, or would you like me to read it?
Sure, yeah, I'll be happy to. So in the age of data privacy and data protection, we saw the rise of some companies that invested tremendous amounts on privacy protecting and managing infrastructure and processes, people and cultures, to build a brand out of that, and to attempt to grow the business based on that branding. Do you see something similar might happen in the AI space, in terms of companies that brand themselves on, the experts and the leaders at deploying AI in safe and, well-governed and so on manners, in compliance with everything, and develop essentially a moat based on that deep infrastructure and cultural investment that they make? Or do you see a future where maybe it's just going to be data privacy and that's it. And AI is going to be this very diffuse, very distributed thing. A lot of companies doing it, and the companies that move faster make the most business and fattest margins. And then AI safety and governance becomes a requirement, something that is added after the fact just to protect the business, as opposed to core and central in their brand.
Fantastic.
I can take a shot at
yeah.
it. So I think, like, it's interesting, and this might be a little bit controversial. So, like, obviously I spend a ton of time not only investing, but kind of building companies and the, tooling and data and kind of like, how do we get AI? But the more and more accessible this tooling has become, and even access, I actually think the competitive advantage is going to be in the organizations that educate their employees on how to take advantage of AI and workflows. Like, you started seeing a couple of like reports coming out about the different consulting companies making access to the different large language models and workflows around it for research and for doing it. And my personal experience, again, this is anecdotal, but like, I use some version of large language models in pretty much everything I do every day, and like, it is truly impressive, like the general kind of like a step up of productivity. Like, something that used to take me 8 hours will take me 2. The quality is the same. I can go through thought processes in a lot faster way. And so I actually think the advantage, at least in the short, obviously data is super important, and being able to do it, like, I'm not discounting that, but if you had to take me, you had to give me a bet on like how an organization truly advances itself, it's by educating its employees on how to use this technology on their everyday work. Like, that's going to give the biggest bang for buck and ROI. That is going to create a truly different experience for those employees and for that organization as a whole.
We've seen, so the question, what I interpreted from the question was, will responsible AI be a legitimate moat, or will it be something that is done kind of to check the box a little bit? Like, are you only reducing potential costs, or is it also like a positive direction that you can move in? And currently, this is asking to like read the future a little bit, but currently we see many organizations putting out ethical AI principles. So clearly they believe that there's some brand to requirement to like say these things. And there was a recent paper by Stanford's Human-Centered AI, which essentially makes the point that most organizations are kind of talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And we see that also with some larger kind of tech groups disbanding the responsible AI teams. So there's some, at least right now, in one sector, some evidence that organizations feel like this is an okay upfront investment in brand, but they're actually not getting that much financially from investing more to make it a moat. Maybe that's because consumers don't care, or there aren't the signals to allow consumers to care. We need maybe potentially a more vibrant kind of nonprofit, civil society, along with transparency, to allow information to even flow to customers, to allow the public to understand this company is a responsible AI company. Like, they are doing things that I care about, and this one isn't. I don't know how the public would possibly be able to make decisions like that today. And so there's no way that it would be a pressure. So the only way that there could be a pressure today is for like governments or some other organization that has more ability to kind of see information to impose a fine. So that's just to say my hope, and I see this in some sectors, certainly responsible AI is a brand that certain organizations are trying to both walk the walk, talk and walk at the same time. And they're trying to make that the differentiator, because we see that even with like people who are trying to take on Google's search engine. They're trying to give you more power and transparency into your data. So I assume that this will be a continued trajectory, because eventually it will become just table stakes. If you're not like protecting my data or allowing me to have the kind of agency, or you're destroying the planet at the same time that you're bringing tech out, maybe this is more of a hope than a belief, but I believe that we'll push for the tooling and technology to be able to do that, such that if you're not, you're clearly negligent, and that will become like a pretty problematic black mark.
And if I can just jump in there, I mean, I've been heartened by the number of Indian brands who are sort of in the B2C brands, which are talking about how much they care about the data. The main primetime TV ads is about how they don't share your personal details with a third party, and then you've sort of seen that over the last sort of a year or so. And I think I think some of it could be sector by sector. If you're building a healthcare AI model or something in the law and justice space, I think trust is fundamentally going to be a sort of a moat and definitely a vector to sort of compete against others. So at least I see it. It'll depend on the sector, but it's definitely going to be a very critical part as Indian consumers become more aware about the data risks that lie with sort of digital technologies.
Awesome. I know we're at time, and it's I have a few other questions that are on chat. In the interest of time, we're happy to take it offline, or if someone wants to hang out for a bit and address it, that's also absolutely fine. I do suspect, and there are a few DMs also which I've gotten, that we might need to schedule a follow-up. So maybe we take those questions up then, if that's okay, just to respect the boundaries of the time. Any last words, Ian, Diego, Tariq? Thank you so much. I learned so much as taking copious notes. And I think we're also recording, so that's going to be great. But any last words from all three of you before we wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. I think for India, the one thing I want to see more of is just converting many of these high-level principles into practice. I think that's what folks are struggling with. So, and at that point of time, I think maybe it's not productized yet, and so a lot of it is just maybe programmatic work. But that's the thing that needs to be done. I think everyone agrees with the 60,000 foot principles. I think nobody's going to come and say, no, I don't agree with X or Y, but how do you help them convert that into practice? So that's something that we'll sort of look to invest in more on the nonprofit side of things.
Yeah, I also agree that putting things into practice is quite important. There's a relatively vibrant LLM ops kind of ecosystem right now, but ML ops, it struggles to get market share. Each company struggles to get market share. It's just difficult to create tooling that is broadly acceptable, especially if it's not, part of like a very straight line between principles and practice. I think the main takeaway for me from this discussion and where I hope we're going to go is an area where we can speak a little bit less in binaries and try to understand that there are many areas of practice that many organizations can improve. And a lot of the time we can take some best practices from one organization, bring it to another. I love hearing different people's analogies for this current moment, whether they use cars or airplanes or the internet. And I think that's one source of kind of imaginings that will be applicable as we kind of continue to navigate this very fast changing technology space.
Agreed. And I think for me, the top of mind questions have always been, how do we think about it from global equity access perspective, or in terms of policy makers, shapers, or beyond policy, also just product developers. How do we shift the narratives so that it's globally more equal? And I know Tariq Omidyar is doing some work. There are a lot of other organizations that are doing some work. And I think the second thing is to your point, just like how do we make it more practical? All the organizations that we've been in touch with for our work have always been like, okay, tell us like exactly practically what to do. What does it actually mean in terms of who do we hire, who works where, how do we think about where to deploy AI versus not? And I think making it more practical as opposed to a theoretical debate, it makes so much more sense in this moment. So thank you so much, Ian, Tariq, Diego had to drop. Thank you so much, Xoogler community, everyone else who's hanging out after 60 minutes as well. And Nitwin, thanks once again for organizing this and keeping us on point. So we should do a round 2 soon. Thanks again. Bye.
Hello. Bye.